Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. Great to be here.
Yes. So we're going to start off, and Mike, like myself, very unorthodox journey into sales leadership. Entrepreneurship in Costa Rica, a little bit of finance, a little bit of product along the way. Can you just spend 2 minutes and give the audience just an overview, what was that journey like, and how has that defined you as a sales leader?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess starting place is I never grew up thinking I was going to be a sales leader, and that wasn't necessarily an explicit aspiration, despite being told all the time by people that I should be in sales, whatever that meant. And so to your point, I went to a liberal arts college just a little west of here, and I was a religion and fine arts major. Two very vocationally relevant things to study. And so like many liberal arts majors who don't know what the heck you want to do with your life after school, senior year, I got into that hiring funnel when all those companies come to campus, and I got a job at Goldman, which I then freaked out about 2 weeks before I was supposed to show up, and had a mild panic attack. It was like, I can't go to Manhattan and be a banker. So instead I waited tables that summer. And I ended up getting a one-way ticket to Argentina with a close friend. And we stumbled our way north to Costa Rica by bus. After a few months, got there, ran out of money, and couldn't find a job, so we started a little business. And that went well enough that some other friends got to move down there, and we had a big adventure for a year or so, opening a few businesses in Costa Rica. One day that felt like it was over, so my partner and I decided to sell the businesses. We came back to the States. Got a job in a finance company anyways, because I was so ignorant of what the real world meant and what it actually meant to do anything that I felt like some kind of institutionalized learning would be helpful. But after a year and a half or so, that felt like it was really over. The best thing about that was that I met my wife, Elise, there, which was a wonderful thing to happen in a job, like many people find our spouses. But then I moved out to California, and this was middle of the dot-com madness, and I was living with a friend who was getting his computer science master's, and who was asking, why aren't I doing this instead of studying this? And so we moved out to San Francisco, and my priority was to find a person for whom to work. I cared less about the company or even what they did. I cared a lot about the person for whom I would work. And I'd always been the kid who sat in the front row and asked questions and stayed after with my coach and tried to get more time, and I felt like that was something that we should have at work too, someone who invests in you and helps you fulfill potential. So I was lucky enough to find that person at a company called Advent Software. And I did sales for about a year and a half for a guy named Steve Luzik, who remains a close friend and mentor. And then he taught me a little bit about sales management for about a year and a half. And then I met a guy named Dan Nye, who totally changed my life and was a leader who, the first time in my experience, was someone who talked about things like a platform of values from which to lead, or asked me about how I wanted to have what I did during the day align with what I wanted to make an impact in the world. And those were just new concepts for me and things that I loved and wanted more from. So I changed what I did to work for Dan. He was running product and marketing, and so I became a product marketer and then a product manager. And I did that for about 5 years. And that's what I thought about myself functionally. If you had asked me, Mike, what are you professionally? I would have told you I was a product marketer, I suppose. And then in 2006, my wife and I wanted to travel, so we took a sabbatical. And we traveled for about 6 months, then moved to Chicago to have kids around family, and started a startup to my close friends from college, got an ad tech business off the ground. And then my friend and mentor, Dan, called and said, hey, why don't you stop doing, he kind of talked down about my startup, that rinky-dink startup you're working on, and why don't you come join me at LinkedIn? He had just taken over as CEO from Reed. And I said no, not knowing anything about LinkedIn. This was late 2006. And I said no. A few months later, he called back, thankfully, and called me names that I won't say here, but basically said you have to come check it out, which I did. I loved what I saw, but I didn't want to move. My wife was pregnant. My parents were so excited to have local grandchildren. And so it took a while to figure out what to do. But eventually I came on as an individual contributor with a mandate to figure out something to do for money with the company. And I went back and forth working out of my house in Evanston, Illinois, and pretending I lived in California for a while we got a few businesses off the ground, and some of those were not the best, and some of those ended up being worth investing in. And then about a year later, I ended up moving into a sales role, as we had just begun to have a real sales presence at that point. So that's a convoluted kind of story to get there.
That's fantastic. And how has that defined you as a sales leader, do you think, when you look at traditional folks who came up through, 2 decades of selling on the street and et cetera? How does that define you a little differently?
I think the first place is that, starting with my own ignorance, I didn't grow up doing it, so I wasn't good at it. I didn't know what there was to do. And I think when we're ignorant, I believe that ignorance is a temporary condition, stupidity is permanent, and I have no fear of ignorance, I have a lot of fear of stupidity. And so I embrace my ignorance in sales, and I try to surround myself with people who were expert. And so I reached out to my network and to the network of the people at LinkedIn. I met a guy named Mike Stanke, who at the time was an executive in residence at Greylock. He was previously the CEO of a company. He also ran North American sales at PeopleSoft. And he then went on to be the COO and now vice chairman at Workday. And I went to Mike and I basically told him I heard these amazing things about him. Would he teach me about sales? And for some reason he said yes. It was a slightly longer, more protracted conversation than that, but eventually he said yes. And so the first thing I did was try to become less ignorant. But maybe more directly to your question, Mark, I feel like what we ended up doing at LinkedIn was being open to the possibility that different kinds of people can be very effective in selling what we have. Now, I've come to believe that there's kind of at least two kinds of companies that sell products. Those that sell products that are primarily commodity products where differentiation doesn't happen at the product level, it might happen at the relationship level or the persuasiveness level. But if you're fortunate enough, as we have been, to be a company where you actually build a better mousetrap, then the person you need to sell that better mousetrap is pretty different. It's someone who just needs to know the truth of their own product and can help find the truth of their client's problem, and then be courageous enough to be honest the whole time. Yes, the truth of my product meets the truth of your problem, or no, it doesn't. And then to be helpful enough to get the prospect to believe.
That's great. And so I think all the sales leaders, many of them probably that raise their hand here, would love to be head of sales and solutions at a $2 billion public, super successful company. Give us a glimpse of a week in the life these days. Where do you focus your time? Maybe even expand on what are you looking at this quarter to do? Yeah,
sure. So I would say, I'm sure like many of you, what I do is really varied. And I think for anyone in a company where you're responsible for a number of things, it differs. So as Mark and I, we were just, as we were walking up here, we were just kind of talking about specifically some things going on in our lives. And my life these days ends up having some rhythms to it on an annual calendar. And after Labor Day is the 10 weeks that I'm busiest all year, all the time. It's when we put on all of our client events. It's when great companies like this one put on their client events. It's very external, very global, a lot of travel. So for me, the next quarter is all about being outside of our four walls, being all around the world, and really interacting with our members and our customers. Other points of the year, January, like many companies, it's all about starting correctly and kicking things off. After October, November is about planning for the next year. And so there's an annual rhythm. Within that, at the per week level, it's all over the place. I live in Chicago, which allows for, as we were talking about, domestic travel ends up being pretty easy. You can love or hate O'Hare, but it's in the middle. And so I basically don't sleep over anywhere in the US anymore. I wake up early, I come home late, but I get to see my kids for breakfast. It's lovely. And so it's varied. Yeah. It's varied.
I think there are a lot of leaders who naturally overlook certain elements. I know some leaders can be negative and they have to make a note to be positive more frequently. Others can be overly positive and make a note to be criticized a little bit more. Others get sucked into the internal workings of what's going on and forget the outside and need to spend more time with customers. Are there any sort of natural tendencies for you, and like you have to constantly remind yourself to go out and do this thing more frequently because it doesn't come as naturally? Sorry for going off script there, but you said be spontaneous.
I like it. Mark and I were talking earlier about the value in spontaneity. I'm like, I don't want to know the questions ahead of time. It's so much more fun. Authentic answers. I feel like that's why you come, right? When I'm sitting in the crowd, I want an authentic answer. So I would say, for better or for worse, and this is an honest truth that is hard for me, given the profession I've chosen, I pick up new software very slowly. I'm a laggard in my personal life. I'm the last person with a new piece of technology. All my friends have to tell me 8 times to get that, whatever that new thing is. And so what I have to kind of give myself a kick in the butt on always is to make sure that I go beyond my normal comfort zone with any new piece of software that we're developing, that a competitor is developing, that a partner is developing, because my natural inclination is to be very shallow in looking at it. And so that's the one where I've got to push myself.
Interesting. So let's shift gears to a topic that is often spoken about here at Inbound and transformation, specifically in sales and marketing. Let's dive into sales. So let's go back to 2007. You joined as an individual contributor. What was selling like then? And let's talk about 2015 and everything that's happened in the world since then and how it's different.
Yeah, so in 2007, maybe there's two sides to the answer. One is what was uniquely happening inside of LinkedIn. That's more about our moment then versus the world. And then maybe the other side is how is the world selling at that time? And then I'll try to compare. So we had a really strong value proposition in selling in 2007. And I mean this facetiously. We had individual subscriptions. And if you were a corporation buying from us, our big value proposition was that we would bundle them together so you had one invoice. So because your people were buying from us, but it was a pain in the neck because there was 20, $50 a month invoices. And so our team of 7 intrepid sellers would call and say, we can give you one invoice. And that's really the basis on which we started our sales team. It's a really strong value proposition. It wasn't until 2008 that we launched our first flagship SaaS product, Recruiter, in the talent space, and that we then began to build a lot around it. So that was our internal reality. And we were doing all the things that people used to do then. We were cold calling. We were, a lot of things that are really contrary, I think, to premises that you guys and the concept of inbound has really helped formalize. Now, we tried to do it in a way that was consistent with our own values. And as we've talked a lot about, we're very much a mission, vision, values-driven company. And our first value is that the free member comes first. Everything that we do starts with an expectation that we are trying to serve this constituent, you guys, our members, first. Our sales process, every one of our processes. So we attempted to do that, but when I bring a critical eye to our practices back then, I think we did it pretty, I don't know if poorly is fair. We did it the best we could at the time. Relative to what the standard is today, it was downright poor. So roll the clock forward to today, where concepts like social selling exist, where incredible amounts of data have been process to allow for insights that can drive different kinds of conversations and different kinds of actions. Where the profile of a salesperson has been reviewed by a prospect as the content has been reviewed. The buyer's journey is so different than it used to be. And so I would say if you look at our organization, like many of your organizations today, it recognizes that the buyer, the consumer, has all the power in the conversation, has all the knowledge, has all the data. And that the role of the seller is to help shepherd her through that process so that they can both find truth together and they can make an informed decision on the extent to which our mousetrap solves their problem.
Can you give us some creative ways that your customers or just users or members are using LinkedIn to support that transformation? Going beyond the, what we can read on the product pages, just, chatting with the customers.
In terms of our employees as sellers?
Well, no,
or the
your customers and your members, how are people using LinkedIn to support that transformation within the organizations?
Yeah, so I say first, it's probably an 80-20, where 80 is just being really good at the blocking and tackling. So I think sometimes there's room for innovation to really be the differentiator, and there is here, but I think if you're just doing the blocking and tackling really well, that's where you're gonna get a lot of your value. For example, read the things that, if you're a customer, if you're a consumer, read the things that your prospective vendor has written, both the individual people, like as an example. And Jill, I see Jill Rowley in the crowd here. I know I always have your words in my head here, but the idea of writing a profile, who are you writing it for? Are you writing it for the recruiter, or are you writing it for your customer? Because if your profile as a salesperson reads, I'm a quota crusher, right? I crush my quota. Get the best of my clients. Who are you writing that for? I mean, who would want to be a customer of that person? And yet, if you actually read some salespeople's profiles, and certainly some of their resumes, that's how it sounds. And that's an insight in how they think. So if you're about to buy from that person and engage with them in hopefully what is the beginning of a long-term relationship, do you want someone that is a quota crusher to be your advocate in their company? Or do you want to be with someone who is genuinely interested in solving a client problem, who's passionate about the work that their company does? And that kind of insight exists now. And if you just take the time to read the profiles of the people with whom you may work, you're going to get a lot of insight. Then go further. What does the company blog about? What is the company collateral? Like, that stuff matters. Marketers are putting so much thought and care into what they create and put out into the world today. I think 10 years ago, if you read a piece of collateral, it sounded like a very traditional, here's the value proposition, here's the case study, here's the ROI. And that's still important, but you can glean so much more from that today. So that's the starting place. I'd say the extra credit is look to see if they've written anything personally. You know, there's more than 1 million people that have written on LinkedIn long-form posts about something they care about. That's a lot of people. And so the chances are that someone you may work with has probably written something. See what they've chosen to write about. And just irrespective of the words even in that document or in that article, the fact that they've chosen to write about something gives you, again, insight into who they are and who they might be like to work with. So I'd say just that proactive searching for the right kind of content gives the buyer an advantage in understanding that's very different from how it used to be.
And this question comes up a lot along those lines. I'd love your take personally on it. Let's say there's a skeptic who's like, you know, we sell into a very old school traditional market, and our buyers, this C-level, very traditional person, their online usage isn't that frequent. Does this still apply to them?
Yep. Yeah, so I'd say the answer is definitely yes. And you know, again, that comment about how much the buyer's journey has changed, there are very, very few organizations in my own experience where a single person makes a unilateral decision anymore. Almost always, in almost all the companies that I've seen around the world, there's been a lot of companies, there is a buying committee, whether it's formal or informal. You know, there may be a traditional, in a sales sense, economic buyer, a single person who signs that check, and she may be empowered to do so. However, there's a group of people around her, almost always, who influence that decision heavily. And some of those people will be reachable. You know, even if the ultimate person says, I don't touch the internet, I don't use mobile, whatever their thing is. And again, there are fewer and fewer of those today. 5 years ago, by the way, I think it's a different story. But there's absolutely a buying committee who is online, who is participating in media, and who is absolutely reachable and influenceable.
Great. And then how about in terms of, let's say the 23-year-old Mike Gamson was entering the workforce today in 2015, looking into a sales career. What advice do you give to him?
Well, first of all, let me just say I'm incredibly thankful that I'm not 23 today, because then all of my college years, like many of yours, would have been recorded. And I mean, I don't know how I can express enough thanks for that. Like, really, it's so genuine. And there's someone in the crowd here with whom I went to college with her husband, and I'm picturing him right now, and I know how thankful he is that his college years aren't recorded. So first I would say, so happy that's not the case. That said, and I think it would be all about finding mentors. I don't think there's a more powerful catalyst for career transformation that I've ever experienced than the one-to-one investment of a person into another person. And you know, if you kind of step back from our reality, our modern reality for a second, you think about like humanity globally, and you think about professions and how deep professional knowledge and skills have been transferred over time. In almost every culture, in almost every part of the world, it's been master to apprentice. If you wanted to be a goldsmith, if you wanted to be a wagon wright, you went to live in somebody's house for like 7 years. And you learned from that person, and you traded all of your labor for basically no money, for room and board, and you got taught. And that doesn't exactly work anymore, because we come out of school with crazy debt, and we've got to get right to work. But in my personal opinion, real expertise, deep professional expertise, is still best passed one-to-one. There's lots of learning that can happen in a very scaled way, and I've seen the benefits of that. It can move the needle. But when you want to take it to the next level, I haven't found a more powerful force in the world for professional transformation than a mentor. So I would take that long-haired, scraggly 23-year-old by the scruff of his dirty neck, and I would have him find a mentor.
That's fantastic. And I noticed that you wrote a great article about that recently on your profile, and you also had the top 100 leadership traits or something, I think, in the last year. One of them was continual learning. And I personally agree with that, both constantly reading blogs and books for myself. I formed actually a peer group that I get together for dinner with once a quarter, which is huge. And then the mentor element is my biggest personal continual learning. So how about a follow-on to that? How do you go about finding that mentor? Maybe people will walk away and be like, I don't have a mentor. Maybe that would be my takeaway from today's session, but how do you go about finding a good mentor?
Yeah, so I think that chemistry is everything in a mentor relationship, and I've been parts of processes, both organic and inorganic. Inorganic meaning at work, someone decides it's important to have a mentor program, and people are matched together. We did that at LinkedIn. I did that on our team maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and it was a real humbling experience because the two people with whom I was matched as their mentor, one got fired shortly after. One's thriving now, and she's doing great. But in that control, in that A/B test, I saw that it wasn't, clearly I'm not a magic mentor because I wasn't able to help this person with whom we didn't have the right chemistry. And so I think inorganic can work, but it's really tricky, because you're both kind of awkwardly put in a situation where you're like, I'm ready to now be your mentee, or I'm ready to be your mentor. And so it's possible, but I think it takes a lot of work to make things comfortable. And ultimately, the chemistry has to be there. So in the organic sense, and organic meaning developing on its own, or with a little bit of facilitation, what I would recommend strongly there is thinking about asking someone to be your mentor is a little bit like closing the deal on the first date. Like, slow it down. Slow it down. You don't need to meet someone and be like, will you be my mentor? Because put yourself in their shoes. It's a bit awkward. What's the commitment? What does this even mean? We don't really know each other. And what I did, and Mike Stanky's a good example, the guy who from Workday now, who just taught me so much about sales. What I did is ask Mike, would it be okay if I called you at some point if a question comes up that I don't know the answer to? That's an easy thing to say yes to. Sure. And then once we did that for a while, I said, would it be, it seems like we're talking periodically, would it be all right if I shot for a more consistent time, like maybe Mondays at 5 o'clock? And he thought about it and then eventually said yes, and then I locked that time down. By the way, that time is still in my calendar right now. If I held up my phone, you would see 5 o'clock, Mike Stanky. It's been in there for 7 years. And we don't talk all the time anymore, but I keep it in my calendar because it reminds me about a lot of good things, both his generosity and all his lessons, and that he found the time to do that, even after he took over as Workday, and even after he was in the weeds in his own job, he found the time to do that with me. So I think on the organic, start small, build up, and if the chemistry's there, and if you can find a way to create value for your mentor in some way by giving back to whatever you can do for him or for her, I think it's something that can be really lasting.
Cool, so I'm hopefully only gonna ask one more question. We have 15 minutes left. Don't be shy, there are mics here if you guys wanna line up with your question. This is an awesome opportunity to have some one-on-one time with Mike Gamson. Please get up there. I've got more questions if you don't have them, but please don't be shy. So let's switch gears to hiring, Mike. You guys are the talent experts. I'd love to get the insider view on what do you guys look for specifically in sales candidates?
So we've hired a lot of salespeople and a lot of people into our sales team who are not salespeople at all, but who just do work to help make clients successful. And I'll give you my personal opinion, because one of the actual management philosophies that we have is we allow a lot of autonomy for our individual managers to make decisions on their own. Actually, personally, I believe that there's a relationship between autonomy and accountability, where for all of my direct reports, if I'm going to hold them accountable, I believe that I need to give them near perfect autonomy. Which means that at the end of the day, I end up making very few decisions, like actual practical decisions, because I have decided to delegate fully to an autonomous person that decision-making authority. So the downside is there's some variability. The upside is you get to see some of the genius that develops when people are left to go running on their own. So my own personal belief and how I hired when I was hiring more directly, first is I like to start with the end in mind. What kind of team am I trying to build? And what type of diverse perspectives and skill sets do I want on that team? So let's say it's a traditional frontline sales team. You've got 8 to 12 people on it. And in our case, when we were building these teams, first it was in the talent acquisition industry. So my ideal team would have a few people from that industry who really, they were the client. They know it inside and out. They can call BS on something that doesn't feel real, and they can relate to the customer in a way where I was in your shoes. Then I like a few people who were great at selling software. They know how software works, they know how to make a demo comfortable, and they can teach those other people who have the core skills from the industry about software, and there can be some learning. And then I like 1 or 2 people who are just X factor people. Maybe they've never done anything professional, maybe they had professional skills that were nothing like these, but they have a track record of excellence where Everything they've done, they've been great at. Maybe they were an athlete, maybe they were a poet, maybe they played the trombone. Whatever it is, they had a time in their life where they carved out the time to practice, to become better, and they excelled. And I think that kind of internal discipline ends up being incredibly reproducible for other traits.
Excellent. First question?
You can come up here. We can very awkwardly have you speak into this one.
Sit right here.
I'll just be like this. So the question, and I'll paraphrase, is when you have the opportunity to work with great people, you have a large array of options from which to choose for a mentor. But how do you choose just one? Is it okay to have more than one? And I don't want to be a copy of that person. I want to be influenced by their ideas. So how do you do that? Essentially the question. So I would say first, agreed. The greater the density of great people with whom you work, the higher the likelihood that a great mentor is there. If you happen to be in a place where there's not a great density of great people, two thoughts here. One is, you might want to leave. Two is, making the best of what you got. That's why we have external networks as well. And because there's always going to be amazing, smart people outside of our company, as well as hopefully inside of our company. So on the first question, absolutely. I almost have always in my life had more than one mentor. I feel like my interests are varied, and I feel like the lessons from the people that I learn, they're usually excellent in one or two things, but I'm interested in insights from more of those folks. So I don't think it's an exclusive relationship, personally. I think it's okay to have several. It also relieves the burden on the mentor, frankly, so they don't have to invest that much time. And I think you'll find the fit. And again, start slow, have the conversation with people, and sometimes people, it doesn't have to ever be formally recognized. Some of the people that I think about as mentors, if they were here, they would be surprised to hear that I think about them in that way. We never put a title on it. We never put a label on it. Yep.
Go ahead.
Testing.
You got it.
There we go.
We're all good now. All right. Hi. My name is Ty Yancey. I'm COO of M-Train in California, and we make some really cool, exciting compliance training. And I'd like to thank HubSpot as a customer of ours.
Nice.
And we of theirs. Mike, I wanted to ask you, maybe put on your product hat for a moment, and just if you could give us some insights as to where you see LinkedIn going as a product. Certainly seen some developments in the training area.
Yep.
Acquisition and otherwise.
Yep.
Can you just speak for a second to how you are looking to position yourself in terms of development for your members, and what it is you want to, what service are you looking to create yourselves into?
Absolutely, yes. So our overarching vision for the company is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. So we believe there's about 3 billion people or so who work. And we believe that simply by virtue of having a free profile and connecting to those around you, good things can happen to you. But more explicitly, over the last couple of years, we've started to manifest a very specific part of that vision that we call the economic graph. And this is an idea borrowing from the concept of a social graph. A social graph being something Zuckerberg and Facebook popularized. It's this idea that there are nodes on a network, and a node being like a point, and then connected to another node. And if you can kind of picture the three-dimensional picture of nodes being connected to other nodes through these line segments, that's a graph. It's a term borrowed from mathematics. And if you think about how a social network or a professional network like LinkedIn works, is we are each nodes as people, and we are connected by our relationship. And so the actual computer science behind how our platform works is all about how you traverse those nodes to get to answers like, who's the best person for me to speak to at this company? So that's a core kind of underlying idea, this idea of a graph. An economic graph was something that we began to realize we had the opportunity to create, which is what if we thought about those nodes not just as people, but as every part of a global economy? What if it was all the people who work, all the jobs that are out there, all the skills those people have, all the companies that offer those jobs, all the educational institutions that offer those skills, and all the knowledge in the world needed to do those jobs? What if those were the nodes? And we started to build this graph. And we bought a company to help us with jobs. We used to have 350,000 jobs on LinkedIn. We thought there were about 10 million that exist. Now we've got 4 million by through the use of a technology that a company that we acquired. We used to have a few 100,000 companies on LinkedIn. Now we have several million. There's about 50 or 60 million in the world. A lot of work to do there. And we've got 380 million of the professionals on LinkedIn today. There's about 780 million total professionals and 3 billion folks who work when you include people who don't have traditionally professional skills. Now, as you go further along this, and you begin to see what does this economic graph do and how can we use it, if we know your professional background and we begin to understand either through inference or through asking you what you want to do with your career, we can understand the gap between the skills you have and the jobs you want. And so it occurred to us that we can do more than just point out this gap. We can help you acquire the skills you need to get the job you want, to live the life you want, and to fulfill your aspirations. So we acquired a company called lynda.com earlier this year. And that's the beginning for us of moving into a direction where we hope to be able to highlight in a very specific way what skills you lack relative to the jobs you want and the people you think about in your cohort, and maybe even the very people who are competing with you for jobs. We can help you understand last 100 candidates who applied for a job had these skills that you don't. Here are places you might be able to obtain those skills. So that's the direction we're going. We want to be proactive about helping people understand the skills they lack and then helping them acquire those skills so they can achieve the life they want.
Hey, thank you.
Hi, my name is Aki. I co-founded a startup called Market Muse. Before that, I was at a venture fund called OpenView. This is a question for both. I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on this. When hiring sales reps, would you prefer to hire someone who's more like the always be closing, like aggressive type, or someone who's more like the nerdy product type?
Are those the only two options?
Yes. You have to pick.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
You want me to take a crack at it, or you want to crack at it?
Well, you're good.
So I would say, I would start, well, I would actually, in my real life, I would push back that those are the only two types. Playing within the framing of your question, I would probably start with it depends who my prospects and customers are. I think the relationship, our second value is that relationships matter. And I think that certain kinds of people tend to work extremely well with other kinds of people, and other times you can count on friction. So for example, if we had an aggressive type of salesperson selling into a traditionally introverted market where no one likes an aggressive salesperson, let me start there. But there are some people where you can predictably say they will like it even less. If that's my target market, I would never go in that direction. If my target market is a New York banker, I don't know, pick whatever is the epitome of someone who may appreciate aggressiveness, may view it through their lens as just simply being direct and assertive. Then perhaps, but I would say overall, if I had to pick one, I would take the geeky, intelligent, thoughtful introvert every time.
Yeah, I would agree with Mike. I'd actually reiterate his opening. I'm a big believer of appreciating your buyer and sales context and aligning your hiring profile with that. I think it's a big mistake when folks, and I asked Mike today, I'm like, what do you look for in a hire? And for people to take diligent notes and just copy that because it's LinkedIn, they're successful. Well, they sell to a completely different type of buyer than you do. So to Mike's point, like if you're selling Yellow Pages ads, I guarantee you that always be closer beats the nerdy type today. Very commoditized market, that arm twister is going to win. Versus if you're selling like, IT, networking infrastructure, that data nerd probably would win. For us, we've tend to gone a little bit more toward the data nerd. We call on marketers a lot. Marketers get a lot of calls from salespeople, and they don't really like the generic type of salesperson. They appreciate that data nerd who can help them think about their market analytics a little bit better, and they're able to build trust and move that deal forward more aggressively.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lana Karen, head of marketing and sales for Blue Bottle Biz. We are in the corporate learning space and training space, similar to gentlemen before. And I'm also curious to know more about lynda.com and how soon users and myself will be able to do what you were talking about. I think it's incredibly exciting. It's an incredibly exciting market opportunity. The growth is incredible. So if you can share a little bit more about when we might be able to see it and how it might work, that'd be great.
Yeah, so for those of you who are less familiar, lynda.com is a company that's been around almost 20 years, and it's a leader in the online learning space. LinkedIn has been a customer for years, and their content library, we believe, is incredible. And our employees were using this product for years and proactively learning on their own. It's one of those products where once your company buys it and there's a library of content, your employees can, on their own direction, just pick courses that they think are interesting. And we looked at our own data, what our employees were doing, and like, wow, they're really using this a lot, like very much more than other places, which is one of the reasons we got excited about it. But all of that's available today. Lynda is out there, and you can, if you haven't, you can go explore it, and there's a lot of richness there. In terms of when the Lynda assets and the LinkedIn.com assets get integrated in a way that you'll see, I can't give you a specific date, but use your kind of rational guess, and two companies of reasonable scale getting together, there's usually an ingestion period that happens for a while, and then my guess is you'll be able to see some compelling things next year.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
So this will unfortunately be our last question. Mike will probably be able to grab others if you want afterward, but go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jess Lampy. I'm with Mylio out in Seattle. We're a photo syncing software company. I wanted to dive into the comment you made about value proposition when you arrived. What was the process like for getting everybody on board with improving upon the value proposition? Did everybody recognize immediately that was true? Did you have to sell people?
You mean single invoice isn't like crushing it for you? That wasn't just like, we got it, build a company on the single invoice value prop? So let's see. It was definitely not something where we had to get everyone on board. And the reason is because the vast majority of people at LinkedIn, scale is 100 people at the time, 100 and maybe 30 people, something like that. The vast majority of those people were in no way connected to what we would call monetization. LinkedIn is a consumer internet company first. We make most of our money from our relationships with companies, but because we're a members first consumer internet company, the majority of the people who work here or work at LinkedIn are only focused on the free member experience. So at that first cut, there was actually only a small number of people who were focused at all on monetization. And that was the group that needed to be corralled into this. And there was a series of other things going on at the time. I had worked, as I mentioned, for a software company that was focused on hedge funds and investment managers. And so my first business that I tried to start there was some sort of data business for hedge funds, helping them invest based on what people do on LinkedIn. We decided pretty quickly that was a bad idea. But at the time, I was like really hot on that idea while this other team was getting ready for a recruiting business. And so it was maybe 10, 15 people had to be corralled. And what we used, which I do think is replicable, is a process of product and market validation where one goes out with a hypothesis, a very explicit hypothesis, with an attempt at a minimum viable product, an MVP. And you go out to your prospective buyers and you walk them through a very structured conversation about, this is the exact thing we're building. If we built it, would you buy it? And how much would you pay for it? And if the answer is no, then you add in one or two pieces of functionality more, because every bit that you add, it's harder to build until you eventually get enough people who say, yep, that's the thing. And so once we had that, we could bring objective data back to the group of people that needed to be corralled. And it's not just one person's opinion against another. It's 30 client visits, 26 said yes for this MVP, 24 have agreed to go through the pilot, and you've got a data set that you can add to otherwise what would be a subjective debate.
Excellent, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Excellent. So we'll see Mike this afternoon on the main stage with Halligan and Dharmesh. And in the meantime, let's thank him for coming out and share his insights at Inbound.
Thanks so much.
Mike.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
That was
Thanks,
awesome.
buddy.
Man.
Appreciate
Thanks so
it. Yep,
much.
thank you.
Appreciate it.